Welcome to Upside Down Mirror, one woman's true story of a twin flame journey, a reflection of true love, true hate, and everything between, where everything and nothing matters at the same time. Paradigms shatter as mirrors of shadows cut through indestructible layers, testing the sands of time. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 9 of Upside Down Mirror. As you recall, in episode 8, I was dealing with a very stressful audit in reference to my mental health and medical practices. I was stuck in a situation that I refused to get myself out of. I was not listening to my guardian parents. I wasn't listening to my own intuition or my own channeling. When I look back at it, it was my insecurities that were so deep and my lack of self love that was so severe that I couldn't let go of a toxic relationship that was literally ruining my life. If we don't listen to our higher selves, if we don't listen to what our heart knows to be true, then the universe has no choice but to intervene in the way it has to make sure that we are okay. So, it was a beautiful day in October. I remember thinking how amazing it looked outside, and I remember looking at the fall weather and breathing in the fresh air and feeling so lucky at that moment that I could even be in such a beautiful environment. And this was the day of my final court hearing in reference to the case presented by the Attorney General's office with the charges of fraud that I had discussed earlier in my episodes. It's never healthy to blame someone else for the things you're going through that are right in front of your face. So I was not completely innocent. I should have done many things differently within the practice. It was my practice. I should have taken care of all the paperwork myself. I should have crossed the T's and dotted the I's. But I actually was not that frightened because I knew that what I was being accused of, I myself personally did not do. Before the court hearing even began, I was aware that I would be pleading to one guilty charge of fraud. This is because the paperwork that backed up the licensure was inaccurate, therefore compromising all of the services and the legitimacy of the billing of all of the services within the telemedicine. The services were rendered, but the documentation was inaccurate. Also, below that was a list of charges that were inaccurate and untrue. However, my lawyer said, you are pleading guilty to one count of fraud, and that's all you're pleading guilty to. So it doesn't matter if you sign that paper because you are only going to be charged with one count. So I signed the paper and was prepared to go forward with the court case. I looked around me and I saw all of the people in the courtroom, and I was stunned to think of how many people were there because of me and the decisions that I had made up to that point. The prosecuting attorney was there, my attorney, the judge, a few other people within the prosecuting attorney's office that I did not know, my friends, my family, even my students were there, and my previous clients there to support me. For a moment, I felt completely stupid for not doing things differently, almost like I was a lovesick child in middle school who became irresponsible just to get attention from the person that they loved. An overwhelming surge of guilt came over me, as well as self-loathing for being here at this time. That would be a great deal of shadow work that I would have to do in the future. I remember, after all of this, still thinking of Gabe in the courtroom, oddly wishing that he were here with me. I got a message from my guardian parents that I was going to be safer after this court date than what I'd ever been for a very long time. So I actually thought things were going to go pretty well for me. The court hearing was pretty clear cut. The prosecuting attorney said their side of things. My attorney said his side of things. Everybody agreed that the paperwork for the telemedicine was inaccurate and I was guilty of that fraud because my name was on everything and I signed off on it. That was undeniable. The judge expressed his concern that I had spent so much time in California accelerating my spiritual growth and career when my practice on the East Coast was suffering and being ran by someone other than myself. He said that that was irresponsible and neglectful. He asked me my thought process at the time, and I was honest with him and told him that I was not happy in that career and I was developing a spiritual practice that I would eventually go into full time. In the courtroom, like I said, I had my family, my friends, and even one of my Buddhist students was actually sitting right next to me. I had several people that were there to support me and testify on my behalf in reference to the amazing changes they have experienced in their lives because of my work. It was an all-day court case. It was very emotional for me. My older sister even got up and testified and said some things that I didn't even know that she thought that were overwhelmingly sweet. I'd already pled guilty to one count of fraud, so there was definitely going to be a sentencing at the end of the court case. We dismissed for about an hour and came back in the courtroom for the sentencing. Of course, my lawyer, my family, my friends, my clients, and myself thought I would be walking away with barely anything. I was definitely not prepared at all for what was about to happen. When the judge sat down, I saw my guardian father etherically walk into the judge. I thought for a second I was just completely stressed out and delusional when the Buddhist student next to me said, "Did you see that?" And I said, "Yeah, I did." And she said, "Oh my gosh, everything's going to be okay. You're going to be okay." And I smiled and agreed with her because I knew that my guardian parents always looked out for my best interest. I knew that this was divine intervention. But divine intervention isn't always what we want it to be when we don't listen to ourselves, when we don't follow the flow of our hearts, when we function out of fear and guilt and self-loathing and not loving ourselves, we are not going through the flow of our heart. And that is when divine intervention has to take place in ways that sometimes are not fortunate for us. The judge looked at me and gave me 1 year in jail. To say that everybody was shocked is an understatement. They were prepared to take me to jail right then. My lawyer stepped up and said she was definitely not expecting this. We are not prepared. We need time. According to my lawyer, it is very rare what the judge did next. The judge stood up and said, "You have 3 weeks to prepare for incarceration. In 3 weeks, I was to report back directly to that courtroom and they would put me into custody." I was very upset. My friends and family and clients were hugging me and telling me that everything was going to be okay. But that moment, I felt like my world had been turned upside down. It was 2 days before my son's 16th birthday. I had a beautiful home with beautiful children and 2 beautiful dogs. With only 3 weeks to move out of the house, arrange custody for my children, find someone to take my dogs, and all the while doing this knowing that I was going to be incarcerated when this was all over with. One of my very best friends drove me home from the court hearing that day, and I barely remember the car ride. It was a 2.5-hour drive to my home from the courthouse. On the way home, I called Sean in tears and told him what had happened, and he told me that he would be at my house in the morning to support me and do what I needed. I remember my heart swelling because I knew that he was going to drop everything and drive 8 hours just to be there for me. and I'd already put him through so much. I didn't have much time to tell my children, and I knew that. One of my ex-employees, who was a nurse that I had to fire because she and the lead practitioner could not see eye to eye and were fighting in front of the patients. I had to let one of them go, and it was her. She was extremely angry at me for that decision, and she decided to take it upon herself to write the version of events and the way that everything went down to the prosecuting attorney. They used what she wrote and put it in the newspaper. I live in a very small town, so when anything like this happens, this is put on the front page of the newspaper. It is aired by the local radio stations. And of course, we all know the wrath of Facebook and social media. When I signed the paper pleading guilty to the one count of fraud, even though there was a lot of things on that paper that were inaccurate, because I signed it, it gave the prosecuting attorney's office permission to publish those events in the newspaper. The nurse who had written up the article for the prosecuting attorney was very creative and did a very good job at exaggerating the events that happened. This would test so many internal boundaries within myself and test the faith that I had for myself. Like I said, I live in a small town, so of course my children's friends knew about it. It mainly bothered me because of the way it was written up and the inaccuracy of the events. This is the event that taught me that the media was allowed to exaggerate and be dishonest. This realization ended up helping me drastically during future world events. This is the event in my life that made me realize 100% that the most important judge that we have is ourselves. Not your family, not your friends, not your teachers, not your students, not the judge in the courtroom. I learned through the whole event that the person that matters the most is you. You ultimately can be the judge that sets yourself free. I can tell you right now that the only thing that got me through the next 3 weeks of my life was microdosing on psilocybin. Like I previously stated, I had a 6,000 square foot home that I needed to sell and put everything in storage after living there for 10 years. Sean agreed to take one of my dogs. The breeder for my wolf dog agreed to take him for the year that I would be in jail. This breeder lived all the way in Miami. My ex-husband agreed to take our 3 children full-time, and Sean agreed to plan to have a loving home for Willow and live full-time with her. This is all stuff that I had planned within the 3 weeks that ended up working out smoothly. However, let's go back to the night of the court hearing. I remember going to sleep exhausted and waking up wishing that that had all been a nightmare. But quickly I remembered it wasn't just a bad dream. And I got up and I started doing what I needed to do to make it through this. I think about that and realize how important the microdosing was for me. When you microdose, you're literally in the here and now, and you're not thinking about your fears, and the shadow energies just seem to disappear. So you can focus on the here and now and do what you need to do, and it opens up gateways to conscious manifestation. Mother Earth always gives us what we need. The next morning after the court hearing, Sean showed up at my house, and this was the first time that him and Gabe would come face to face. I was already stressed out now, but prepared for the inevitable. Sean walks in and Gabe immediately confronts him and tells him to leave and get out of his house. Sean says, "This is Rebecca's house, and she wants me here, and I'm going to stay." And they're staring at each other face to face. After staring each other down for quite a while, eventually Gabe backed down and walked down the steps. As predicted, Gabe was not supportive during the whole process. He was only very concerned about where he would end up and what he would do when I was in jail. By this time, I was 100% taking care of him. So I made that my duty to take care of him and plan for his future during these next 3 weeks as well. This is the definition of martyring that I don't recommend and I would never do again. For the next 3 weeks, things went as smooth as what could be expected. I was even able to contact Willow's future doctor in daycare and begin the paperwork and process for children who chose to be unvaccinated. Sean and I agreed not to vaccinate Willow, and that was extremely important to me. My children were very, very supportive, as well as my ex-husband. My family came up to help me every day to pack and get prepared. Of course, families come together in times like this, and I realized how much I was actually loved by my mother and 4 sisters. Like I said, I live in a very small town where this actually got published on the front page of the newspaper. And I remember my 16-year-old child saying at the time, "Mom, I didn't even read it. I know you. I've lived with you. I love you. I know how beautiful you are. I know what an amazing person you are. I know what you're capable of." My 2 other older children were standing there next to him, and they all 3 hugged me. Once again, I will tell you that from this experience, I have learned that if you choose to worry about what other people think of you, if you choose to worry about what your acquaintances think of you, the people that you work with think of you, the people in your community think of you, then that's going to put you in a place where you're unable to move forward. Because at the end of the day, the most important person to love you is you. And when you learn to release these shadow energies of unworthiness, self-loathing, and guilt, you will notice and you will feel the people who love you the most come closer and closer to you. But it all starts with you. There is not one person that says on their deathbed, "I wish I would have cared more about what others thought of me." This took me a while to learn. But what you think of you and living up to your authentic self and doing what your heart knows is right is the best thing that you can do. It is the number one thing that will set you free forever. When clients talk to me about difficult times in their life and look at me as though I don't understand because I seem super successful to them and happy, which I am, I always refer them to this time in my life where I couldn't even see more than 1 inch ahead of me, which looking back on was actually a great way to live in the here and now and to get through what I needed to get through. What I can tell you, in which I will go way deeper into this in my future episodes, is that if you are going through something that you don't feel like you're going to survive, the best thing to do is to live in the exact moment that you're in and get through the exact moment and then move on to the next thing that you have to do. And do not think too far ahead of you, because your fears, your own predictions, your programs, and your paradigms of what might happen will get into the way of you consciously creating and having an outcome that could be miraculous for you. The day that I was supposed to turn myself in, Gabe came up to me in the morning and said, "I really need you to go shopping for me before you leave," and he gave me a grocery list. I realized at that moment what his priorities were, and it really helped to put things in perspective. My entire family and Sean all rode the 2.5 hours to Baltimore City with me to that courtroom to turn myself in that day. They put handcuffs on me, and I remember walking out looking at my family and thinking that I would not see them for quite some time and wondering what my life was going to be like. I was treated like a criminal. I was put in a holding detention center that was absolutely crazy. I will publicly say that that place should be shut down for many, many reasons. I can't believe to this day that women are forced to live this way. There are women in this place that have not been outside for more than 2 years because of the way it's designed. It is meant to be a detention center where they hold you to put you in a permanent placement, or you could be there awaiting trial. So some of the women in this detention center have been waiting trial for over 2 years. It is like an oversized gym filled with bunk beds side by side. Many times the guards are too scared of the inmates to even walk up and down the floors to make sure that everything is okay. I came from a situation, which I have been humbled because of this event, where I used to call the hotels ahead of time that I was traveling to make sure that they had down comforters to sleep on. I was very picky about the type of bedding I had, the type of conditioner I had for my hair, etc. So what I experienced during this process was absolutely traumatizing to me at the time. This was inner city Baltimore. I grew up in a very small town that was suburban, in a middle to higher class family. We did not lock our doors at night. We could leave our bikes in the yard. I was extremely sheltered. I was faced with a room full of screaming women that looked like they were going mad. And I remember thinking, I don't know how I'm going to survive this. But I can tell you that many, many things happened that were paranormal and magical during this whole process. And that's what the rest of the episodes are going to be about, is this process and thereafter and the magic behind it. I'll start by saying that everybody was lined up for fingerprinting, because once you go into this holding place, they fingerprint you, and after you're fingerprinted, you're supposed to leave within the next few days to go to your permanent holding place. I was very tired. I had been up for a couple days, and a woman walks up to me, a guard walks up to me, and she says, "Oh yeah, you've already been fingerprinted." I hadn't been fingerprinted, but I didn't disagree with her. I just let that comment pass. So what that led to me being in this holding place for an extended period of time when the other people that went in with me were leaving after a few days to go to their permanent place. So the next few weeks in this holding detention center in inner Baltimore City actually changed my life forever. I started off very isolated. I was lucky to even be able to look at the phone, let alone use it. And I remember hiding where I could on different bunks, because everybody was assigned a bunk, but the guards were too scared to actually enforce these assignments. So people would take your bunk when they felt like it, and if you didn't know the ropes of what was going on, then you were just kind of left to fend for yourself. This is what my first couple days looked like. Then I was sitting at the table and I heard my guardian parents say, "Go ask that girl if you can sleep above her." This was a very tall woman that, looking at her, you definitely would not mess with her. She was very tough looking. I said to my guardian angels, I said, "I don't think so. I'm not going to ask her that." And then I kept hearing it in my head, "Go ask her if you can sleep on the top bunk. Go ask her if you can sleep on the top bunk." I had learned my learning lesson in reference to not listening to my guardian parents. which are actually a higher aspect of my all-knowing self. So of course I listened this time, and I walked over very nervously, and I looked at her, and I said, "Do you mind if I sleep on your top bunk?" She looked at me and gave me a beautiful smile and said, "Oh my gosh, God must have answered my prayers." She said she was praying and putting salt around her area, commanding that all of the negative energy be cast away, and she was calling in positive energy. She said, right then, I walked over and asked her to sleep on the top bunk. Her name is Ashley, and to this day, I still keep in contact with her. She was literally one of those angels that you meet in a bad situation. She was in there because she had been raped, and while she was being raped, she kicked the man down the stairs and he died. So she was facing murder charges. The first night that I slept on that top bunk, she made sure that I was extremely comfortable. She knew the ins and outs of that place. She had seen many people come and go. She got me the right clothing that I needed. She even made me earplugs and eye covers so that I could sleep well. She was drawing beautiful art that she put around my bed. And she told me not to worry. She said that she was told that she was to protect me and that I would be okay. I realized at that moment, through my frustration and my sadness and many other feelings and emotions that were going through me, that I was still being divinely protected, that this process would end up miraculous for me. I did not expect what would happen the next morning. I woke up the next morning, and as I looked at the women in this jail, this holding center, I saw their stories as though they were in a television and I was watching it. I knew why they were there, what caused them to get there, and how to work on them so that they could have the best possible outcome to leave that place. I had never been so psychic in my entire life. The general theme of all of the women that I would see this with were women who trusted men to the point and gave themselves away to the point that they were in a situation that was this undesirable. There were stories that were unbelievable. One story was of a woman who drove her boyfriend in front of a 7-Eleven and parked the car. She was unaware that he was going to rob the place. He robbed the place, come back, and then he got in trouble, and she was driving the car, so she got put in prison. One woman was a yoga instructor who her boyfriend sent all of these guns and explosives to her yoga practice so that he could pick them up at a quote unquote safe place. And because that was her practice, she ended up being the one that got charges against her and was put in this place as well. These were the general themes of the women that I could read in the movies I saw around them. One woman, I saw a baby that had been miscarried, and I told her, your baby had been miscarried, and this had been about 3 months ago. And this was a pretty tough woman, and she looked at me in awe and said, yeah, that's correct. And I said, this baby wants to come back, but the baby knows that you were thinking about going back with this man, and the baby's not going to come through until you figure out a way to love yourself enough to let him go. And she was in tears and so thankful for the information and the healing that I was giving her. So, of course, through talking with these women and helping them, I ended up becoming extremely popular in this place where I was extremely scared just about 24 hours earlier. I genuinely wanted to help in any way I could because these movies that were appearing around the women were paranormal, and this is not a gift that I had before going into this place. So I knew that I was supposed to help them. I had lines of people lining up for me to help them, to the point where my bed bunk Ashley actually gave me hours to work. She'd say, you can't bother Rebecca after 6 o'clock p.m., or you can't bother her during dinner. I remember the woman that was being in charge of the phones, she actually came up to me and she said, I don't believe in this stuff, but I want you to do a reading and a healing on me. And after I was done, she looked at me and said, you can have any spot in the phone line that you want. At one point during this whole disaster, I was holding my hands over my ears because people were screaming and yelling, and it was about 2 o'clock in the morning because there was no such thing as going to bed there. And one of the women that I had helped walked up to me and said, are you okay? If you want, I'll make everybody in here shut up. And I just looked at her. I said, no, 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 that's fine. I was put in a situation where I was able to get lunch easily and effortlessly. So my guardian parents and my guides gave me these gifts to help people. And at the same time, they were helping me. It wasn't a pleasant experience. It still wasn't easy, but it made me realize that me being there at that moment was important for my growth and the people's growth around me. I became very close with Ashley and remember thanking and having gratitude to the universe that she was put in my path, and even thanking my guardian parents that I was given the gift of this sight so deeply and intensely. Finally, after a few weeks, I realized that it was abnormal that I wasn't being put in the permanent place I was going to, because everybody kept saying that when you got out of the holding place, they would put you in a place where you got to go outside and things became a little bit more livable. So I was excited to be able to leave, even though I had connected pretty well with the people around me. So I walked up to one of the guards about 2 or 3 times and finally made them listen. And she looked at her paperwork and she said, you've never been fingerprinted. You can't leave here, and we don't plan for you to leave until you're fingerprinted. So me not paying attention to the fact that that woman already thought I was being fingerprinted had caused me to be there for a few weeks. But I knew that that woman thinking that I had been fingerprinted was important so that I could stay there for as long as I needed to help these women and also to learn what I needed to learn. But the most important reason was yet to show itself. The next day, I got fingerprinted, but that same day, a woman named Danielle checked in. She was very quiet, very to herself, and seemed like she didn't have much of a memory left. I began talking to her, and as she started to warm up to me, she became more coherent. She told me that she had overdosed on heroin about a year ago and had died. She was lying dead in a trap house when someone came in and resuscitated her. So she had died and came back to life. And ever since then, she said that sometimes she just knows things. And she looked at me and she said, you and I will go to the same place. And not only that, we are going to be put in the same cell. And I said, how can you even know that? And she said, trust me, I do. So it was the day after Halloween that I was lying in my bed and I heard my name being called. And I heard her name being called at the same time. I hugged Ashley and many other women that came up to give me a hug. I got my stuff and I was preparing to leave. They looked at Danielle and I and they said, because of the way the jails are in Baltimore City, that they don't have any space left for women. So Danielle and I would go to Jessup, which is a maximum security prison in Maryland, where murderers are held. Danielle looked at me and said, don't worry, I've already been there. I know that place inside and out. You're going to be fine. I remember being extremely scared. I know what goes on in maximum security prisons, and I didn't know if I was prepared for what was about to come. In order to travel to Jessup, the maximum security prison, we were shackled as though we were Hannibal Lecter. our hands and our feet. And we were put in a police car and we were transported to the prison. Danielle explained to me on the way that she had been put in prison a couple years back because she was on heroin and she was detoxing in a prison cell where they had put her for the night. And she had decided, as she was coming off the heroin, that she wanted to steal one of the guards' clothes, dress like the guard, and escape. She said, I was thinking irrationally. I was coming off of heroin. And I knew that the plan wouldn't work deep down. She said, but she actually jumped on the guard and attacked her. This ended up getting her 1 year in a maximum security prison, which was the same prison that we were going to. She was put on probation afterwards, and she violated her probation, which led to her coming back to the facility that I met her in, and then them sentencing her to more time in prison, but they weren't exactly sure how much more time she'd have to spend. But she explained to me that she had been in this prison for a year, that she knew all the guards, she knew a lot of the people, and that I would be okay and she would watch out for me. So if you can feel better in a situation like that, that definitely helped me to relax a bit. This concludes episode 9 of Upside Down Mirror. I really hope that you join me for episode 10 because the paranormal events that happened while I was in prison took me a few years to be able to even process to do this podcast.